That's good.
Good morning, Pamela.
Morning, Jenny.
So my name is Jenny Carr. For those of you who are listening in for the first time, I'm the Programs Director for Courage Beyond and Centerstone Military Services, and I'm here today with Pamela Jacobs. Hi again.
Hi.
So over the last couple of weeks, I have asked the leaders of our online groups to come talk to me. And one of the reasons why I've asked them to do that is because they're an amazing group of people that are true Renaissance artists in that their hobbies are varied, their capabilities are varied, and oftentimes we only see them in one space. And so I asked them to come here and talk to me about their passions, what they've been doing on the side, but not necessarily showcasing within our Courage Beyond programs. So I wanted to talk about that. And then the second reason why I wanted to talk about it is because as people who have been working in an industry, a nonprofit, a mission, however you want to say it, for multiple years now, there's a strong tendency, I think, at first to go into a mission and really sacrifice yourself in order to make other people feel better. And it's a noble purpose, and it's something that is very inspiring, and we're passionate about it. But over time, that can take its toll if you're not taking care of yourself. And so I asked Pamela today to come in and talk about one of her passions and one of her ways of practicing self-care, writing. So Pam, are you still willing to talk about that with us today?
Yes, of course.
Awesome. Well, how did you get into writing? What made you first decide you wanted to write?
Well, I've written as long as I can remember. As soon as I knew how to write, I started writing. I didn't have the best childhood. I grew up in an abusive home, and writing was my way of escaping. So I would, kind of sneak out of the house and go into this empty field next door with a, notebook and a pencil or a crayon or whatever I could find and just write, and eventually started kind of escaping into the writing what I now know is fiction. At the time I thought it was just make-believe stories, and so it was my escape and kind of my refuge from what was happening at home.
And do you remember as you were writing it if you felt like at the time the writing was doing something for you, like you would feel better after you wrote?
I don't know if I was that aware as a child, but I guess I must have been because I kept doing it. So I think I definitely knew that it was the only time that I felt kind of safe and could actually be happy is when I was out of the house. So that was part of it for sure. But then also, when I was writing.
A lot of times we ask people to meditate in our journals. So journaling as a way of processing their emotions. And what I found really interesting about your story, and one of the reasons why I wanted you to tell it, is that you were writing something that had nothing to do with your experience and yet still had somewhat of a catharsis, even though I'm sure as a 9-year-old you probably weren't saying catharsis or going down that path. So have you always been writing fiction, or has that moved into any other forms of writing for you?
Actually, so I started off writing fiction when I was young and then really moved away from it. And for many, many years would only write nonfiction. And I didn't even see myself as writing nonfiction. I was just journaling and kind of starting to tell my story in my journal because I wasn't quite ready to tell it any other way yet. And then just kind of started to get back into more fiction writing in the past few years. But when I was younger, I think I wrote what I now know is fiction because real life was much too hard to write about. I eventually, around 9 or 10, started writing about some real things that were actually happening. But I moved away from fiction for quite a while, and then and didn't really even read fiction for a long time. And then when I got back into reading fiction, that helped start to write it again as well. Yeah.
it's fun at that point, right? I mean, you're creating in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of a therapeutic way to express things. So I feel like you're still expressing and maybe working through things that may be painful, but just not with the exact story. So you're the emotion that's behind it is still in the writing. It's just not the actual events. Does that make sense?
It does. There is a fascinating article that came out in the New York Times, I believe, several months ago at this point, that talked about reading as a therapy. And I see the application in what you're saying. So what they said was that readers were more empathic, and that was across the board, whether they were reading fiction or nonfiction. And it was also across the board, whether people were traditionally readers or were not, considering themselves readers. And one of the hypotheses one of the, whatever what's the plural of hypotheses of the author, and I think the authors of the study, was that because you were writing about something that wasn't personally attached to you, it gave you the freedom to feel something without the social implications of feeling, shame or emotions that you might traditionally attach to yourself in those situations. I thought of you as you said that and in the article, and was wondering if that was true for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I still feel like I have, and I apologize for the noise in the background. My cat is going crazy because I shut the door. But I still tend to lean more towards nonfiction writing. A lot of the way that I use writing is by journaling every morning. So that's where I focus. But I have definitely found I've definitely found that writing fiction can be calming and peaceful and help me connect with some different experiences and different emotions too.
I also like fiction, I think, for its ability to create life lessons or have morals in a space. As someone who isn't religious myself, I think perhaps I turn to fiction and reading as a way to create its own sort of spiritual guidance. And for me, fiction has a way to create metaphors that life doesn't always offer, in a way that resonates with people and is powerful and helps you process in that way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
So I do want to talk about your nonfiction, because I do see the process of writing as a catharsis, as an expelling. I think last time we talked about Ernest Hemingway's quote that, writing is easy. You just have to sit at a typewriter and bleed. And regardless of his personal character, I heard he was kind of a jerk. There's a scariness to bleeding, in my opinion. A scariness to exposing the truth about yourself. And even if that truth is something incredibly human, I mean, certainly it is. If a human experience it is by definition human. But can you talk about your movement from writing down your nonfiction in a journal to a move to having it be something that is opened up to the public?
Sure. Well, like I said, I've always written. During really difficult times in my life, I found that I moved away from it and then could definitely tell a difference, and would always feel much calmer and at peace when I would come back to writing. But it was always kind of in a journal, and just it was always for me. And then I started writing kind of my story, and with the idea that eventually this may turn into something I would share, but I had no real desire to do that or concept of what that would look like. I definitely hadn't at that point gotten to the point that I was talking about, especially my experiences as a sexual abuse survivor or a sexual assault survivor. I hadn't really spoken about any of that yet. And so I was just writing. And then a few years ago, I had the opportunity to join a writing group with some really phenomenal women who I was completely intimidated by, two of whom are published authors, and one's a composer, and they're all just talented and amazing. And we started sharing our writing with each other, and I just decided to take the leap and kind of share this memoir that I've been working on forever. And there's one chapter in particular that I didn't have a title for yet, and I just kind of called it the chapter that took 13 years to write, because it really did take 13 years for me to get through all of that, because it was such a painful experience in my life to write about. And really kind of expected that I would hand this book over and they would say, you should probably keep this in your journal. But they were, it was the first time anyone ever actually told me that I was a writer. And it was it was really empowering to have them read it and be moved by it and tell me that it evoked emotions in them. And it was just a really, it was a powerful experience. And to be able, I found that anytime I share my story, whether it's in writing or out loud, I heal a bit more. And so that was, it was a really incredible experience. And I still, I'm still pretty protective of that book and still add to it all the time, but it was great to know that it could be shared and that it would have an impact on people and possibly help other people heal as well, which is what writing is for. So, yeah.
I would love for you to talk more about the writing group, because you're in a group of some pretty good, published authors and Pam Jacobs. And I can't imagine how intimidating that must have been. And I know one of your group members is a poet, which I feel like is even more intimidating. Going into the group, writing something that you felt that was you, that was so raw you, and then, as you said, kind of opening that door to the criticism of how that writing happened. What was your experience, and what kind of surprises did you have about the writing process and how that resonated with your readers of other authors?
Yeah. There's a lot to answer there. I'm trying to think of one. Well, one, I think, so I had the benefit of being friends with these phenomenal women, so that helped kind of create that safety a bit. But it was definitely intimidating. These are published authors and poets and musicians, and when we first started getting together, the first person I met was Melissa Seligman, who I had read her book, and that's kind of how we connected, and we were stationed at a few different places together. And through a meeting, met Cassie Primo Steele, and kind of after the meeting sent her an email that said, "You have to be my friend," and which my daughter said was creepy, but it worked. And then Suzanne Kapler is a musician and composer, and so we would start off our writing, who became a great friend as well. But we would start off our writing groups with oftentimes a writing prompt. And those pieces of writing where we were writing right there in the moment, those were incredibly scary to share. But I haven't edited this. I haven't read over it 48 times to criticize myself. And, I haven't done all the things that you do before you share writing. And I remember early on in our writing group, when I shared what I had written and the group was moved by it, I thought, oh, wow, maybe I can actually write. And just, that's always the most powerful thing, I think, is being able to know that your emotions are evoking emotions in someone else and helping people think about things from a different perspective. And it is, exactly like you said, the Hemingway quote, it's bleeding onto the computer or the paper, and being able to share that and have other people have empathy for you and compassion for you, and you have that connection. So that's been, other than the logistical pieces of being in a writing group, that they can give feedback and you have experts who are able to give some constructive criticism about your writing. But the best part has just been having people who you can have empathy for their experience and they can have empathy for yours. Yeah, it's incredible. And it's a great way to form even deeper connections with people. So I'm not sure that I answered your question at all, but kind of just ran with talking about the writing group. So,
I assume you did. I got a little teary.
Okay.
You mentioned connection a couple times, and I would love for you to talk more about it. It's to me, you feel, in my experience, you start to feel incredibly close with the person who you're reading, and then I also understand the vulnerability that comes with the writing process. And, continuing that metaphor of bleeding, like it's not a sterile process. And I think as a pair of perfectionists, that can be incredibly scary. What is raw is certainly, well, if it's raw, it's not polished, and we want to be polished, right? So there was a couple of moments that you've mentioned to me in the past, and I'd like for you to talk about it here, about perfection and grammar, and how that can bump up against trying to really say what you want to say and evoke what you're trying to say in that emotional way.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm definitely a recovering perfectionist. Still working through that, but and I definitely over the years found that was the biggest hurdle and the biggest barrier to my writing, was that I always felt like I couldn't share it unless it was perfect. And that comes from not just being a perfectionist, but also being a grammar geek and having some formal training in writing and college English courses and all those kinds of things, where you focus so much on the grammatical quality of your writing and style and all of that. And so when I was trying to write to be perfect, then either my writing was very cold, or I just didn't write. Because if I knew I knew up front that it was never going to be good enough, then I just wouldn't sit down at the computer and wouldn't write at all. Or I may still let myself journal, but I knew I was never going to share that with anyone. So, and the things I did put out there, it was really interesting. The things that I did put out there that I'd spent so much time editing and trying to make them perfect, and I was still, of course, scared to put them out there, they didn't connect, they didn't resonate with people as much. And when I just started sitting at the keyboard and letting it out and writing how I would speak and not worrying as much about it being perfect or the commas being in the right places or whatever, then it came out much more, it was me. And that's what people connected with. And that's when I started to have people saying, hey, we're really interested in this, can we publish that article? And people then reading the article and saying that really, I connected with that, and you spoke to my experience, and people really being able to see themselves in what I wrote, because we're not perfect people. And so when I was trying to put out perfect writing, no one's going to connect with that. And there's no such thing as perfect writing. So yeah, when I kind of let go of that, then that's when my writing became much better and much more real and was much more impactful on people, because they could, it was authentic and not perfect, but it was authentic. And that's really, I think, what people need and what helps people heal.
Do you think it's what you need to?
Yes, absolutely. And when you mentioned connection, I was thinking, writing is definitely a great way to connect with other people, but every morning when I sit down outside with my journal and my cup of coffee, it's how I connect with myself. And writing is definitely one of my strongest spiritual practices too. I mean, I sometimes, and this may sound a little loony, but I sometimes will write to myself. Like I'll write and then give myself some time to kind of be quiet and meditate, and then kind of write the answer. So I'm, like connecting with my instinct, or whatever you want to call it, higher power, whatever it may be for different people. But so I use that writing time as a way to kind of meditate and get clear on what I'm really thinking and feeling. So yeah, it's a way I connect with myself, because as you mentioned, when we're busy all the time and when we're doing work for other people, and always, like we all do, we're helping others all the time, and we lose connection to us and what matters to us. And, writing has been a really important part of connecting with me again.
In that space, it sounds like you're having empathy for yourself. Writing to yourself is a way of removing the first person and showing compassion for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I remember a therapist I worked with once who we were working through some pretty deep traumas and unpacking some stuff, and then I said, I have this weird feeling of sadness, but it's like it's for me. and she kind of laughed and was like, that's called self-compassion. Maybe you've never felt that before, but that's a good thing. And it sounds silly, but I think a lot of us go a really long time without ever really having self-compassion, and writing is a great way to connect with that too, and give yourself time to, and it's not about self-pity, it's really just taking good care of yourself and giving yourself time to heal from whatever pain you may be in. Yeah. And we all experience pain, even during good times. We all go through, we have difficult emotions that come up, and I think writing is a great way to not only have compassion for yourself, but also I've discovered and heard from really smart people that this is scientifically true, that when you write, you're actually kind of processing the emotional stuff that's coming out and helping move it over to the logical side of your brain. So it's not only kind of a catharsis in that way, but it's also really helping you heal from and process possibly trauma or just really difficult emotions.
I hear so much of that, and as I was getting ready this morning, I was thinking about the compassion and the bravery that has to go into writing. So compassion for yourself, compassion for your readers, in some sense, especially in a nonfiction work, and especially writing what you write about in nonfiction. There has to be an amount of compassion and leadership in your writing as you're, talking about these things that are not comfortable to talk about. And at the same time, it struck me as funny how reticent we all are, and how we will hesitate to say things that are universal. Pain is universal, and yet so many people struggle to make that first step and say it, acknowledge it. I don't want to say admit it, because then it sounds like a crime, and it's not. So for those of you who are listening, you have in Pam someone who has been through that experience as well. And Pam, I would love for you to talk about how they too can write. How does one write?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you mentioned just how that hesitation we have about putting our pain out there, I mean, shame is such a strong deterrent, and we all experience it at different levels and different times in our lives. And I remember the first really raw personal article that I put out in a big space that I was submitting to the Huffington Post, and it was about my experience as a sexual abuse survivor. And it took forever to hit the submit button. And I went back several times and thought, there's no way I can put that out there. People are going to judge me. They're going to think I'm feeling sorry for myself. I mean, all those thoughts that come up. They're going to think I don't know what I'm talking about, or how can survivors come to me as an expert when they see that I have all this pain and trauma still? And so all of those thoughts came up. And what finally made me kind of push the button was, I know how powerful telling your story is. I've seen it with thousands of survivors I've worked with, how powerful it can be. So how can I tell other people to share if I'm not willing to put it out there? And so I kind of owe this to the people I work with to put this out there. And if it even helps one person, then I'm going to do this. And as soon as I submitted it and started getting emails in from people, and it was about the fact that the most powerful words a survivor needs to hear are, "I believe you." And I started getting emails in right away from people saying, "Thank you so much for writing about this. I needed to hear that." And then also from people who would just write to say, "I believe you," who were showing compassion for me. Wow, it's such, writing is such powerful connection. And yeah, and so as far as who can write, anyone can write. I mean, that was another, that piece of writing especially was another one that wasn't grammatically perfect. It wasn't, if my college English professor read it, I'm sure she would have red ink all over it, but it was real, and that's what people wanted to hear. It was about my experience, and any experience that you have, there are people who can relate, because like you said, pain is a normal human condition. And so yeah, I think just sit down with a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen, or sit in front of your keyboard. In our Beyond Surviving classes and the groups through Courage Beyond, that's one of the first things I have people do, is to get a journal. Same in Healthy Relationships, get a journal or a notebook and just write, and I'll give people writing prompts each week. Yeah, that's how you become a writer. Everyone is a writer, so just sit down and write and let it out. One of the most powerful parts of writing is just not having to carry it around anymore. You can leave it on the paper, leave it in the, on the screen, and not have to carry it around throughout your day.
I think if I asked a single more question, it would totally burst this beautiful bubble that we have created. So I did want to say thank you, Pam, for having that honesty and having that bravery and willingness to share your story. I also want to encourage our listeners out there, I hope there are tons, to reach out to us if you need us, but also consider how much power you have in yourself, and what writing could potentially do for you. So you can visit us on our webpage at www.couragebeyond.org to find out more. And you can reach Pamela at pamela.jacobs@couragebeyond.org. Pam, thanks so much for coming back this morning and talking to us. And I am looking forward to hearing your next book.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. I appreciate it.